I'm Joel the Landlocked Sailor, and today I have a heater. It's the M95 carbine of Austro-Hungarian design. The M95 action was employed in a long rifle, a Stützen or short rifle, and a carbine. This particular one was updated to the 8x56 rimmed cartridge by Bulgaria, and it was shortened from a long rifle. You can tell that by the long rear sight. The M95 action was adopted by Austro-Hungary in 1895. Now, as for the history and the development, I'm largely going to leave that alone because folks like C and Arsenal have gone into great depth about it, and I really don't have anything to add beyond what Otthias and May and the rest of their team have done there. So if you want to get into the history of this this particular action, I highly recommend you go to C and Arsenal and bring a bag of popcorn. You'll be there for a while. So the 1895 action is a straight pull that was originally chambered in 8x50 rimmed. The 8x50 rimmed cartridge fired a 244 grain bullet at approximately 2,000 feet per second. They were updated in the 1930s to fire a 206 grain bullet at approximately 2,400 feet per second. And the difference between these two rounds interests me a great deal. And the reason that is because they're on either side of the wounding watershed, perhaps we'll call it, 2,200 feet per second. Below 2,200 feet per second, you haven't exceeded the elasticity of flesh. So you end up with a permanent cavity where the bullet has traveled, the hole, and then there is a temporary cavity from the shock wave of the impact, everything bouncing out of the way, and then rebounding, filling that temporary cavity back up as things return to their normal place. When you exceed 2,200 feet per second, you've exceeded the ability of that surrounding flesh to stretch. And instead of stretching to get out of the way, it tears. So you have your permanent cavity with a whole bunch of tears in the flesh around it, of course increasing blood loss and other damage. So I'd be very interested to know if the 8x50 round was, if it had lesser wounding capability than the 8x56 round that was later adopted. Now, of course, we're looking at the straight pulls of the World War I era right now, and this having been updated in the 1930s by Bulgaria to the new round, the 8x56 rimmed, it isn't precisely, of course, what was used in World War I. However, the action remained the same, and a lot of them became quite stiff after the changeover, but this one is still very smooth. It requires a bit of a kick to open it, but when handled in a soldierly fashion, it's plenty easy to operate. As far as the history goes, I know I said I wasn't really going to talk about it, and I'm not going to get into much detail, but there were approximately 3.5 million rifles of this action produced, whether that was rifle, Stützen, or carbine. There is a total of approximately 3.5 million. I've seen some conflicting data as far as how many were produced, but 3.5 million seems to be a popular number, so we'll run with that. The rifle, of course, was adopted by Austro-Hungary, but it was also adopted by Bulgaria, and it was Bulgaria that would use it first in the First Balkan War and then the Second Balkan War, prior to World War I. The Austro-Hungarians, of course, would use it throughout World War I, and it gained a very good reputation for being a fast rifle. In fact, Otthias and May mention on their channel that even the Italians wrote a song about it. The Italians, of course, facing off against the Austro-Hungarians in northern Italy. After the war, with the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Austro-Hungarian Empire, these weapons were distributed around various new states that had once been part of the empire, and they were also included as war reparations to the victors. For example, a large number of them were given to Italy after the war. They ended up in service in Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, and Austria, of course. Some of the Balkan states, I believe. I won't try and provide you with an exhaustive list, but they were quite a common rifle in Central Europe in the wake of the First World War. They were actually produced in Czechoslovakia. There was a short run of about 5,000 there until the Czechoslovakians settled on a Mauser in the mid-20s and then got rid of their M95s. The main production, however, was of course done in the Austro-Hungarian Empire at OEWG in Steyr in Austria and by FEG in Budapest, Hungary. This particular one is stamped Budapest for the FEG factory. A little bit more about this one. As I mentioned, it was adopted, it was altered to be a short rifle from a long rifle. It was produced in 1918, and other than that, all the numbers appear to match on it. It has a stock that came from another source and was force matched. The bolt is unnumbered, but the barrel and receiver both match. So what I'd like to do here from this point forward is we'll zoom in on this and have a close look at some of its features, especially the action and how the bolt works, because that's ultimately what our goal is to compare these three straight pull action rifles of the World War I era. So we'll go ahead and zoom in and talk about the details of the rifle and then start ripping things apart to see what we can see. Here we are again with our M95. We'll start at the muzzle. Here you can see we have a barleycorn sight. It's not a particularly great front sight for shooting long distance. Certainly I find it difficult to get a decent sight picture with it at 300 yards and above. But that said, despite its detractors, I do like this for 100 yards and below. Certainly I could see it in a CQB situation in a trench, for example, being quite a good sight to have. I mean, it's big, it's thick. Let's see if you can get a good look at it there. But it's a big, thick thing, which when the adrenaline's pumping and things are stressful, all you have to do is put this big block of metal in the center of visible mass and pull the trigger. So at a closer range, I could see it being, quite an enjoyable sight, or quite a friendly sight to use. Next, we have the rear sight. The lowest setting is actually flipped up here at 300. The battle sight is set to 500 meters. Originally, these would have been in paces when they were produced by Austro-Hungary. I believe the minimum setting was 500 paces, which works out to roughly 340 meters. They were scrubbed and redone in meters when the modification was made for the new cartridge. Next up, the reinforce. We have some information stamped. This one has the two shields in 18, indicating that it was FEG production in 1918. And the Budapest also indicates FEG production and M95 type of action, as they use the M95 designation for all of the rifles, regardless of length. Next up, we have a magazine. It takes a 5-round en bloc clip, as I showed you last time, and we'll see again. And the bolt. I'm just going to turn this around here so we can see it a bit better. Now, the bolt starts off like so, with the round chambered. Firing, you drop the cocking piece. Now, to open it, overcome the initial resistance there, which is easy to do when it's in your shoulder and not so easy when you're holding it in front of a camera. But you'll see as it opens, you pull back on the action, and I don't know if you can see in there or not, but through that portion of the movement, the bolt itself is rotating. Once it's rotated a full 90 degrees, it has unlocked, and that allows the travel to the rear. Then, coming forward again, your cocking piece sets up on your on the sear here and stops moving. And from that point forward, as you advance the bolt carrier, the camming surfaces inside here on the bolt, running on tracks inside the bolt carrier, force the bolt to turn 90 degrees and lock. The locking lugs will be vertically inside the grooves at the rear of the chamber here, just behind the chamber. The safety is the switch here on the side. Pushed in, the rifle is on safe. Pulled out, the rifle is live. To remove the bolt, simply push the trigger forward and pull the bolt. Difficult to do this with the camera, but we push the trigger forward and pull the bolt out. So from there, we have the butt with a solid butt plate and the original number canceled out with the new number stamped on the right side. You can also see that the old spot for the sling swivel has been filled in, and it's been moved to the left side of the wrist. The other swivel, well, not swivel, but fastening point is up here on the barrel band halfway down the barrel. So, our bolt. This is how it is in its locked position inside the rifle. When it is unlocked, the bolt head, or the bolt itself, is actually extended out the front of the bolt carrier. So how do we pull the thing apart? Well, first we can relax that. We pull the cocking piece out the rear and put the safety on. That holds it to the rear for us, and unscrew. So we get the cocking piece off. It takes a while here. There we go. So the cocking piece is off. That, of course, now takes away the spring tension. And now we just pull everything out the front. So we have the extractor and the bolt. Now there's a little piece in the back of the bolt here that unscrews. Now bear in mind your firing pin is inside here under pressure from the spring. So careful as you unscrew it, lest you send it flying across the room, smashing your best china. There's the spring and the firing pin. So let's have a look at what's actually going on here. You've got your bolt, and you have these camming surfaces cut into it. These camming surfaces are what force the bolt to turn as they ride the rails. I don't know if you can see this, but hopefully you'll at least see the firing pin stop and then follow them. But there are rails inside the bolt here. If we push the firing pin in, it can travel along them. And riding these rails, let's try and set myself up here. There's the other one there. Riding these rails causes the bolt to turn like so. So when you're locked, you pull the bolt to the rear and it'll come up to here. At which point the bolt is now unlocked and wedged in with the extractor, upon which there is a small groove here as well that grabs the bolt to these slots. That, where are we? That holds the whole thing together once unlocked to this point, and it travels rearward as a unit. So if we reassemble, if spring is trying to escape, as they often do, probably can't show you this part too well since I'm fighting a spring, but you get the idea. You put the firing pin retaining piece back on, screw it in. So there we go. Now, when putting this back together, you have to make sure that the retaining piece here has its cuts lined up with the actual camming surfaces here. Now that we have it together, you can see how the firing pin, the extractor clipped around here finds its way into the little slot here, finds its way to rest in that groove. And then when pulled to the rear, it then will find its way to rest in here, and the one forward, like so. So, reassembling, you have a groove along here on the side of your bolt. You want to find the flat piece of the firing pin here and line those two up. Make sure that the retaining piece here is lined up with the cut on the bolt, and that flat side of the firing pin and groove bolt go in line with the actual bolt handle. From there, push in like so. go. Push home. There. Unfortunately, I let go of the safety, so now I have to do that again. Hooray me. There we go. I think we've got it this time. And then screw in. In theory, anyway. Nope, don't have it yet. Okay. Try this again. There we go. Now we push down. Now we have the firing pin sticking out the back, and we can screw on the cocking piece. Back it off so the thumb pad here is sticking up to the top. And then you can let go of your safety, take the tension off, pull the bolt head back out to the open position. You'll need it to be like this for reinsertion into the rifle. And just line up these lugs here that travel in the rails. Slide it forward gently so it doesn't snap back into the locked position on you. Bolt forward. And Robert is your mother's brother. So that's how this guy works. And how does it feel? Well, if I take and decock it there, find there is an initial resistance as the bolt starts to unlock, which really isn't that severe. It can be awkward when it's not up against something solid like your shoulder. But as the bolt turns there, of course, it's harder when it's not caught, as you'd normally be unlocking the bolt after firing. So you have that initial hump, and then after that, the whole thing slides nicely back, and then forward, and locks up very, very smoothly. Overall, it's a smooth action, as when it's operated quickly, that resistance isn't even noticeable. So it is a good fast action, and the bolt handle is located in a reasonably logical place close to the trigger. So I certainly find this an enjoyable rifle to operate and to shoot. Of course, being a little guy with a big round, it kicks you a bit, but well, such is the price we pay for playing with our toys. Well, I hope that was interesting, and I thank you for joining me and sticking around this long. I certainly enjoy discussing these old GATs, and I find the straight pull actions especially interesting in that they're sort of an evolutionary oddity compared to all the other rifles that were adopted for military service in the World War I era. They're certainly unique. Next week we'll be looking at the Ross Mark III, which was adopted by Canada in 1910 and was their service rifle on entering World War I. In the meantime, I hope you take the time to both like and subscribe, and hopefully I will see you next week. Cheers.